it was a professional atmosphere, but it was relaxed professional as opposed to today when everything is under rigid control. Now this year is the anniversary year of the launch of the Spitfire. And I happen to have been deputized to drive the first US Spitfire in from what was then Idlewild Airport. Came in on, excuse me, what was in that Merlot? It came in on Flying Tiger Airways, which was the air freight carrier in those days. And I took a taxi out to the airport, went to the freight area, and here's a bright red Spitfire sitting on a pallet. Unstrapped it, climbed in, checked the gas, drove off the pallet and headed down Queens Boulevard into New York. With the only one in North America. Can you imagine these days there'd be a transporter, 3 security guards, and, you know. So I'm going in on Queens Boulevard, and I'm thinking, this car, it rides nice, it's roomy, and so forth, doesn't have much go to it. Well, I discovered the following day that it ran much better with both carburetors hooked up. It had gone on the plane, I guess, in quite a hurry. Brand new car, just not really an assembly line job, but a prototype. So that's the one that you will see in the early Spitfire ads with the red car with the plain hubcaps. That's the one. It's in the first US Spitfire brochure. As I say, it ran much better with 2 carburetors. What else happened in those days? Well, we had the British, what do we call them? The British Automotive Manufacturers Association test days. They had these at Lime Rock up in Connecticut. They had them at tracks out on the West Coast. And the British Auto Manufacturers Association was a group of all British manufacturers. Something that was a little difficult to conceive then, and even more now. I mean, they had the Automobile Manufacturers Association here, but Ford and GM and Chrysler didn't get together and run events together. But the British did. So they would rent Lime Rock for a day and invite all the auto writers and the business reporters and so forth up to drive British cars around Lime Rock for a day. And it started at 9 o'clock in the morning. There was a keyboard about as big as that screen. And there were keys on there for everything from a Sprite to a Rolls Royce. And the Rolls Royce wasn't keys, it was a tag, because they had a driver. They took you around the track, you didn't get to drive. But you could drive literally anything. So you could try a Mini and then climb in a Land Rover and then climb in a Hillman and then a TR3, etc., etc., etc. Well, I was up there in 1960 and I had taken a TR3 up, and there was enough left of it after all of this drive. By the way, they served beer for lunch too. But if you wanted more than 1 beer, you had to turn in your driving pass. So that was, you know, a certain amount of control. I had to take the TR3 back to New York. And I got headed down the Taconic Parkway, stopped for gas. And when I got back in the car, I put my foot on the clutch pedal and went for first gear, and it wouldn't go in, and it ground, and the clutch pedal felt funny. I got out of the car and I reached in, and the clutch pedal's hanging down, you know, about halfway down. I took a hold of it, and it came off in my hand. The weld had broken up at the pivot point. So there I am, I'm still 60 miles from New York. I am in a gas station that was about to close, and I had a date that night. Okay, put it in gear, turned the key, pushed the starter button, whoop, 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 whoop. Drove it all the way into New York with no functioning clutch. It was fine until I stalled it in the middle of Broadway and here came a bus. We managed. We parked our press cars in those days in a place called the Temple Garage on West 54th Street. I have no idea what's going on back here. So, one hot summer day, this was also in the 60s, I got a call from the supervisor at the garage saying, "Hey Mike, you gotta get over here." "Why? I'm busy." He said, "You gotta check out one of your cars." Well, I said, "Come on, Sam, you check it out and let me know." He said, "Come over." Okay. So I walked over, it was only a few blocks. And he said, "Come on, up in the elevator to the 3rd floor." We got off the elevator, and right away, I knew why he wanted me. It had been an English business writer, not an automotive guy, a business writer, had come over and borrowed a Herald convertible for the weekend. Well, he'd gone fishing. And he'd come back and he left his catch in the trunk. 2 days before. August, 95 degrees. It was pretty bad. It cost us a trunk mat, a rear seat, because it had penetrated, etc., 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 and cans of spray this and spray that and sell this thing quick. Out. A lot of interesting things like that happened with the press cars. And of course, I was in charge of the press fleet. And you would lend a car to somebody, and it was sometimes somebody you knew, and sometimes somebody you could count on, and sometimes somebody you'd never heard of, who was representing himself as such and such a media outlet. And let's see.
Who would do that?
Who would do that? Yes. That's funny. I've just had a conversation. One day I was driving across 57th Street going to the service department, which was at that time over on West 57th, right by the West Side Highway. The account executive from the ad agency was with me. We're in a TR4. And we're riding across, stopped for a light, and Bob said, "I want to look something up." He had a TR4 himself. "You got an owner's manual in the car?" I said, "Sure, in the glove box." He opens the glove box, and a blue panty girdle fell out in his lap. We never traced that one. Years later at British Leyland, I got an MG back and opened the trunk, and there's a beautiful camera tripod in there. So I called the guy who'd had the car, and he said, "No, it's not mine. It was there when I used the car." I went back 2 or 3 other loans. I still use the tripod. Then there was the one that came back, and I'm feeling down by the seat for some reason or other. Come up with this real neat little pipe. Little bowl, some yellow residue in there. That was pretty cool. And others like the same. You remember David E. Davis, who was editor of Automobile and so forth and so on. He borrowed an MGB, got most of the way to Watkins Glen before he turned it over in a ditch. And it used to happen a lot. And we were, of course, very heavily involved in racing. And, well, heavily involved in that we would publicize it, but we wouldn't necessarily support it. Triumph ran teams at Sebring in 1957, and at least one car in 58, and then kind of backed off. But when the TR4 came along, this was going to be a performance car that we were going to take advantage of. And some of the regular TR3 racers bought TR4s and started preparing them. And I got a phone call in November, and this was 1961, from a guy down in Virginia who said, "My name's Bob Tullius." And he said, "I'm racing one of your cars. I want a TR4. I said, "Fine, well, they're in short supply, but if you go over to your dealer, you can probably place an order." "Oh, no. He said, "I got a plan for racing." He said, I'm gonna set up and get you a national championship." Well, nothing would have it, but he had to come up to New York. And he arrived at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon and sat in my office for 3 hours talking. And at that time I had a guy working with me named Fred Gamble, who had been a professional racing driver, so Fred was in on it. It got to be 5 o'clock and we were all dry, so we adjourned around the corner to the Fuji Bar and Grill, which is still there, and sat at the bar. And Group 44 started out on 3 bar stools in the Fuji restaurant, fueled by Kirin beer. And as a fact, we told Bob no. Sent him back to Washington. He came back in the following March of 1962, and he had already gone to a couple of races down south and beaten TR4s with his TR3, so we knew he could race. But still, I said, look, times are bad. They were. 60 was a good year, 61, 62, not so good. I never saw that in my life. I was there when this picture was taken. Where was I? Anyway, so Bob sat in my office for 2 hours. At this time we'd moved over to Madison Avenue by that time. And I said no, and he left. What he did was hang out in the reception area and wait for the company president. And when Martin Tustin came into the reception area on his way home, Bob grabbed him and started talking. And the next morning, I got a call, come down to Martin's office. He said, "Get this man Tullius a car." I said, "But where?" He said, "Get him a car." I said, "But get him a car." Okay. Okay, so Bob Tullius's first Triumph race car was powder blue. And he came in second at Lime Rock in his first race. He crashed at his second one in practice, and badly. It was at a place called Lake Afton, and he was following a Porsche, and the exhaust system fell off the Porsche and headed for Bob's head. So he naturally cut the wheel. What did he do? He went left first and hit a tree, and bounced off that tree, back across, and hit another tree which buried itself in the trunk up to the gas cap. But if he hadn't hit the tree, he would have gone in the lake, so that was probably a positive because he was out. He took the wreckage back home, and with Ed Deal's help and another wrecked Triumph, they built a TR4 which was so stretched and twisted and fixed that it had an 89-inch wheelbase instead of 88. And it was painted black because that was the only color that would hide all the scars. And he won the championship.